They tell you that the night shift changes a person. They tell you that working under the cold, clinical hum of fluorescent lights while the rest of the world sleeps does something to your mind. They say you start seeing shadows where there are none. You start interpreting the settling of an old building as footsteps. They call it night shift paranoia. I used to believe them. I used to laugh it off, drinking stale black coffee from a styrofoam cup, thinking myself completely safe behind the thick, locked glass doors of Route 9 Express gas. My name is David. 3 months ago, I believed that human malice was something you only encountered in major cities, in dark alleys, or on the evening news. I thought that out here, 40 miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but acres of rotting pine trees and dark, empty asphalt, the only thing I had to fight was boredom. I was wrong, dead wrong. If you are listening to this late at night, look around your room. Ensure your doors are locked, because the most terrifying realization you can ever have in this life is that you are no longer alone, and the lock on your door is only as strong as the glass beside it. It was October 14th, a Tuesday. The weather forecast had predicted a severe autumn storm, and by midnight, the sky had completely collapsed over the highway. The rain wasn't just falling, it was violent, throwing itself against the front glass windows of the convenience store like handfuls of gravel. The wind howled through the gaps in the metal awning outside, making the heavy plastic signs above the pumps sway and groan. By 1:30 a.m., the road was entirely dead. No long-haul truckers, no local commuters, no teenagers driving aimlessly, just me. The rhythmic clicking of the refrigerator compressors and the digital clock on the wall ticking away the minutes. Tick, tick, tick. At 2:10 a.m., I did my routine sweep of the store. The store was small. 3 long aisles of junk food, a row of drink coolers in the back, and a small office behind the counter where the security monitor sat. Everything was in its place. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I went back to the register, pulled out my phone, and tried to kill time. Then, at exactly 2:42 a.m., the silence broke. The electronic chime connected to the outer perimeter sensors let out a sharp, piercing beep. Ding dong. I looked up at the main monitor. A car had pulled up to pump 4. It was a vehicle that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. A late 90s dark blue sedan. The paint was peeling. The bumper was held together by rusted silver duct tape, and the windows were tinted so heavily they appeared completely pitch black. But what caught my eye immediately was the front bumper. There was no license plate, just an empty, rusted bracket. The car sat there under the flickering neon light of pump 4. The headlights remained on, throwing 2 long, pale yellow beams through the dark, misty fog that had rolled in with the storm. The engine was cut, but no one moved. No one opened a door. No one rolled down a window. For 5 minutes, I just watched the screen. My hand was hovering over the logbook, waiting to write down a generic description if they drove away without paying. But they didn't drive away. They just waited. At 2:48 a.m., the driver's side door finally opened. It didn't open smoothly. It swung open with a violent jerk, catching the wind. A man stepped out into the pouring rain. Even through the grainy, low-resolution security camera, I could tell there was something deeply wrong with his proportions. He was tall, easily 6'6", but incredibly gaunt. His limbs moved with a strange, jerky, almost unnatural stiffness, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. He was wearing a bright yellow, oversized vinyl rain poncho. The hood was pulled so far forward that his entire face was cast in absolute shadow. He didn't look at the pump. He didn't have a wallet in his hand. He turned his body toward the store and began walking. I could hear his heavy boots hitting the waterlogged asphalt. Even through the thick walls of the station, he wasn't rushing to get out of the freezing rain. He was walking with a slow, deliberate pacing, his head tilted slightly downward. The automatic front doors slid open with a sharp, mechanical hiss. A wave of freezing, damp air rushed into the store, bringing with it the smell of ozone, wet dirt, and something else, something foul, like decaying copper or old rust. The hanging product displays near the door rattled violently from the wind before the doors closed behind him. The man stood on the rubber mat at the entrance. Water was dripping rapidly from the edges of his bright yellow poncho, pooling around his boots. Drip, drip, drip. "Welcome to Route 9 Express," I said, my voice echoing a little too loudly in the quiet store. I forced a polite customer service smile, though my stomach had already tightened into a hard knot. "Let me know if you're looking for something specific." The man didn't move. He didn't nod. He didn't even lift his head to look at me. He just stood there for what felt like an eternity, his breath coming out in faint, ragged plumes of white mist in the air-conditioned store. Then, without a word, he turned left and entered aisle 3, the drinks section. From behind the counter, my view of aisle 3 was partially blocked by a massive display of motor oils. I had to rely on the circular convex security mirror bolted to the ceiling corner. I shifted my weight, leaning back, keeping my eyes glued to that mirror. The man in the yellow poncho was standing in front of the glass door coolers, but he wasn't looking at the energy drinks or the milk. He had pressed his forehead directly against the glass pane. His hands were tucked inside the poncho, but I could see the fabric twitching, shaking violently, as if his entire upper body was vibrating with nervous energy. "Sir?" I called out, my voice losing its polite edge. "Are you finding everything okay?" He didn't break his stance. He stayed pressed against the glass. Then, very slowly, his head began to tilt upward. He wasn't looking at the ceiling. He was looking directly into the reflection of the mirror. He was looking directly at me. Even in the distorted, curved metal of the mirror, I saw his face. His skin was a sickening, pasty white, stretched tight over his prominent cheekbones. But it was his mouth that made my breath lock in my throat. He was smiling. It wasn't a normal grin. His lips were pulled back so far, his gums were bleeding, showing rows of yellowed, irregular teeth. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely hollow. He lifted a single hand from beneath the yellow vinyl. His fingers were long, skeletal, and covered in dark, dried mud. He didn't point at a drink. He lifted his index finger to his lips, making a slow, deliberate motion.
My heart hammered violently against my ribs, the sound loud in my ears. I reached down beneath the counter, my fingers searching for the small metal toggle switch of the silent panic button that connected directly to the county sheriff's outpost. My fingers found it. I flipped it down. The man suddenly turned away from the cooler. He didn't walk toward the register to pay. He didn't walk toward the exit. Instead, he reached up, grabbed the heavy plastic handles of aisle 3's shelving unit, and with a sudden, terrifying burst of strength, he threw his weight sideways. The entire metal rack, loaded with hundreds of pounds of glass bottles and metal cans, came crashing down onto the floor with a deafening, explosive smash. Shards of glass flew everywhere. Dark liquid pooled across the linoleum. I jumped back, my back hitting the tobacco racks behind me. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of the store. I've called the police," I screamed. The man didn't run. He didn't even react to the noise. He stood amidst the broken glass, his boots sinking into the dark liquid. Then he reached into his poncho, pulled out a small, folded piece of white paper, and dropped it onto the floor. He looked at me one last time, turned around, and walked out the automatic doors, disappearing into the torrential rain. I stood behind the counter for 3 full minutes, paralyzed, listening to the heavy downpour outside. I looked at the crumpled piece of paper he had dropped in aisle 3. I walked over, my boots sliding slightly in the spilled soda, and picked it up. I unfolded it, expecting a lunatic's rambling. Instead, it was a grid, a handwritten calendar of the past 2 weeks. Every single night I worked, my exact clock-in times were noted down to the second. But next to tonight's date, there was no time written. There was only a single set of GPS coordinates pointing directly to my bedroom window at home, and a short sentence scribbled underneath: "The lock on your kitchen window has been broken since Thursday. I fixed it for you. See you tonight." Before the horror of the note could fully register in my brain, my phone suddenly buzzed on the counter. It wasn't me calling 911. The screen showed an incoming call from a local restricted number. I swiped up with a trembling finger. "Hello?" I stammered. "David? Is this David?" A panicked female voice came through. It was Sarah, the county emergency dispatcher. "David, listen to me very carefully. Do not make any sudden movements. We received a silent panic alarm from your station, and I just managed to patch into your store's live feed from my console." My heart skipped a beat. "Sarah, thank God. There's a man in a yellow poncho out here. David, stop talking," Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking violently. "Look at the monitor for camera 3, the one covering the back hallway right behind your office." I slowly turned my head toward the grainy screen. The back hallway was completely dark, cast in the dim red glow of the backup exit light. "David, Sarah whispered, and I could hear her typing frantically in the background. He's not outside anymore. He skipped the front door. The camera shows him standing directly behind your office door. He's been standing there for the last 4 minutes. David, don't turn around. A massive crack of thunder shook the entire building. The neon lights overhead flared white, hummed violently, and then died. Total darkness. The main power grid was gone. The only illumination left in the entire store was the emergency backup light above the rear exit, a dull, sickly red glow that cast long, distorted shadows down the narrow corridors. I didn't think. I scrambled backward, hitting the emergency manual release lever on the front automatic glass doors. They burst open. I tumbled out into the freezing rain, coughing, gasping for air, rolling onto the wet asphalt. In the distance, the flashing red and blue lights of 3 county sheriff cruisers cut through the fog. The suspect fled into the deep pine woods behind the station before the cruisers pulled into the driveway. The convenience store was shut down for investigation. The dark blue sedan at Pump 4 was left behind. When the investigators searched the vehicle the next morning, they found things that the local news refused to broadcast, including clothing belonging to 2 missing night shift workers from neighboring counties who had disappeared over the last 6 months.